I wanted to take this opportunity to make a brief video on Chapter 2. We started on Chapter 2 in the 6th class period of the semester, and then I had to be absent on Tuesday, and so Dr. Gooch, a colleague of mine who's retired, graciously agreed to take the class, but he didn't record it, so I want to make sure that I cover all of the material for both the online class and the face-to-face class and give you access to the videos so that you can review them before the test. And so this will be a little bit of a review of what we covered on Thursday of last week, and then also what Dr. Gooch covered on Tuesday, which was yesterday. So we started talking about the role of IMC in Chapter 2, and just as a brief review of that, we talked about marketing strategy and analysis, and the text tells you that it should, your IMC plan should be generated from your marketing strategy or your strategic marketing plan. And I said, of course, that assumes that business already has a strategic marketing plan, and I don't think we should assume that. A lot of businesses don't actually have a strategic marketing plan, and they probably should. So you need to develop the strategic marketing plan, and that's going to be derived from the overall corporate strategy based on the company's situation, situational analysis, your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and then is going to identify market segments and the target markets that the company wishes to go after. So in that opportunity analysis, depending on what type of product or business you have, you can have three sort of different opportunities: alternative markets for current products, and in class we discussed Coca-Cola, and the idea that the product life cycle for Coca-Cola in the United States is probably in the decline, as people have realized that high caloric soft drinks are not necessarily healthy, and we talked a lot about that in class. And so they're going to develop alternative markets as the emerging and newly industrialized countries have come to the forefront. They are making progress in getting those countries to adopt Coca-Cola. It's the #1 iconic brand. We talked about the fact that for years and years and years, Coca-Cola was the highest brand value. New products for current markets. So in the United States, going along with the idea that Coca-Cola is probably in decline, they've started to come up with new products for existing markets as the baby boomers have realized that health is important and they maybe stopped drinking as much sugary soda. They have started turning towards bottled water, and so those are new products that they've had to develop for current markets, and then new products for new markets. As we have new generations entering the workforce in the United States, their preferences may be different from previous generations, for example, and so Coca-Cola is constantly developing new products for these new markets that are emerging. The competitive analysis, looking at direct brand competition, sticking with the Coca-Cola example, the biggest direct brand competition for Coca-Cola is PepsiCo. Indirect product substitutes would be things like coffee and tea that have hit the market. Obviously, a lot of people are going to Starbucks and Teavana and all these different places, and those have been substitutes for other types of beverages. What gives Coca-Cola a competitive advantage? Obviously, their size in the market, their trade secret, and their brand equity are things that give them a competitive advantage. So market segmentation. Market segments are made up of individuals with common needs who will respond similarly to marketing actions, and there are various ways that we can segment the market. The top three here are easy to do: geographic, demographic, and socioeconomic. Geographic, you can sort of pick out regions that you think are similar, and we had a lively discussion in class about whether or not Oklahoma was Midwestern, Southern, Southwestern, etc. But obviously there are differences based on regions, and the example I used in class was when I was getting my PhD at New Mexico State. They asked school-aged children, elementary children, where they're most likely to see a boat, and those children responded overwhelmingly with on a highway in New Mexico. If you ask kids in Oklahoma the same question, they would say on a lake, and if you ask kids in Florida, they would probably respond in the Gulf of Mexico or in the ocean. And so you can see that that leads to different marketing, and the example I gave was Yamaha makes a wave runner, which are very popular in places like Oklahoma and Florida and South Texas. In New Mexico, their quads are a bigger seller, and so if you go to the Yamaha dealership there, you're more likely to see quads as opposed to wave runners being marketed. Demographic information, gender, race, things like that can be used. All of that information can be obtained fairly easily from the United States Census Bureau. Socioeconomic factors can also be obtained from the Census Bureau. A more rich source of information is psychographics, and the way people actually purchase or use products can give us a lot more insight into whether or not they're a potential buyer for our product. And I talked a little bit, and I know Dr. Gooch talked about the VALs. So you go to strategicbusinessinsight.com and you can take the VALs survey. The VALs framework is predicated on whether or not you have high access to resources or low access to resources, and then what motivates you. Are you motivated by ideals, by achievement, or by self-expression? And there are 8 categories. The innovators tend to be motivated by all 3 of those, and the survivors, which are the lowest access to resources, tend to be somewhere in between ideals and achievement. So what we see is, for example, with regard to college students, is that they may move from being makers to experiencers as their access to resources increases once they leave college and actually get a job, for example. So one of the things I think that students can do to help prepare for exams, and I tell them this is in class often and in my office hours, is think of ways that you can use this information in your everyday life. So think about how you would find examples in the real world out there that are applicable to you. And so thinking about restaurants, for example, in the Oklahoma City area, when I talk about VALs, a lot of times I use restaurants because everybody goes out to eat. We seem to be a society that is largely driven by going out and socializing and eating. More and more people are eating out, although that trend is reversing. When I was a kid growing up, more people ate at home every day, at least for dinner. Families typically had dinner together. That's not very typical in a dual income home where people have conflicting schedules, and oftentimes children have lots of activities that they're engaged in, and so restaurants are something that we're all familiar with. And so thinking about Oklahoma City and restaurants and innovators. So innovators have high access to resources. They're confident. They are skeptical about advertising. They're the least likely to be persuaded by advertising. They have an international outlook. Many of them have traveled broadly, and they're future-oriented. And so if we think about restaurants in Oklahoma City, what kinds of restaurants would innovators be attracted to? Well, it's hard for me to believe, but in Oklahoma there are actually now vegan restaurants, not just vegetarian, but vegan restaurants. I never thought that sushi restaurants would survive very long in Oklahoma, but they've actually survived a long time, and now we have this new thing. So an innovator would be highly attracted to that as something new to try. They're confident, they're in risk-taking, and so they would be interested in that. As future-oriented, vegan restaurants might be attracted to innovators, for example, because they do less damage, in theory, to the environment, as opposed to restaurants that rely on animal protein. Thinkers have high access, so innovators would, let me step back for 1 second, innovators would be least likely to go to places like McDonald's, for example. Thinkers have high access to resources. They're highly normative, which means they focus on the ought. They can suffer from analysis paralysis. They tend to plan. They are historical in their outlook. They're not influenced by what's fad, what's really trendy, and they like traditional intellectual pursuits. And so again, using our restaurant examples, what kinds of restaurants in Oklahoma City would be attractive to thinkers? Well, there were a set of restaurants that historically have had a lot of prominence in Oklahoma. So, for example, you see advertisements in Oklahoma City and the Oklahoma City Metro for Cattleman's Restaurant. That would be a restaurant that I think that thinkers would really like. It's historical. It's located in the stockyards. They have a very good quality of food, but it's very traditional fare. They like to plan things like going out to dinner with their friends. Cattleman's is one of those places that you plan to go. That oftentimes you have to get reservations because there's usually a line if you don't. So planning is important. Where are thinkers least likely to go? Well, since they're not influenced by fads, they're maybe not going to go too vast at the top of the Devon Tower, which seems to be a highly popular, trendy restaurant today. So it's not that they wouldn't necessarily go there, but it may not be the top of mind. And again, I don't think you're going to find thinkers at a lot of fast food chain restaurants like McDonald's or Burger King. Achievers have high access to resources. They have a tendency to put money first, a me-first attitude, and money equals authority for them. They're family-oriented. They are anchors of the status quo. Many of these people are first-generation professionals, and so they like to show that they have achieved something. I think vast would be a place that achievers would definitely go. It's at the top again of Devon Tower. It's trendy. It's a status symbol to go there. And so I think that's one of the places that might be attractive to them. Experiencers have high access to resources. They're the first in and out of trends. They have the latest fashions. They like physical activity. They're sociable. They're spontaneous, and they like visual stimulation. So what kinds of restaurants would be appealing to experiencers? Well, again, if you think about Red Prime, it became, when it first opened, the latest fashion. It's been there for a while now, so maybe it's not the latest, but the appeal of Red Prime is not just about the meal, but it's about the aesthetics of the restaurant, and that would be, I think, attractive to experiencers. What are they not likely to be interested in? Again, fast food, street culture, street food, things like that. I don't think would be necessarily attractive to experiencers. If we look at low access to resources, people who are motivated by ideals or believers, they believe in moral right and wrong. They have great spiritual faith. They're the most likely to go to traditional sort of Protestant churches. They like friendly communities. They use TV as an escape. They have no tolerance for ambiguity. And advertising is viewed as a legitimate source of information. So what kind of places would believers like to go? Well, they like restaurants that are, generally friendly. Things like Golden Corral is a popular place after church in many instances for people to go. Sort of the local cafe would also be for believers, where they can see other people from church, I think would be attractive to them. Strivers have low resources, revolving employment. They like video games. They're fun-loving. They're the center of low-status street culture, and they tend to wear their wealth. So if you think about like H&H, for some of you who know what that is, and the food truck craze, I think that would be attractive to strivers. Makers are low resources. They have distrust of government. They're interested in automotives, outdoor activities, and anti-intellectual. They want to own land. I think that restaurants that appeal to them would be generally sort of the standard casual dining restaurants like Chili's, because it's sort of a standard menu. Survivors have the lowest access to resources. They're usually the oldest. They're very risk adverse, cautious. They're thrifty. They're heavy viewers of television. They're extraordinarily brand loyal. They're the least likely to use the internet, and they may still only have a landline in their household in many instances. So I think this is the one that is going to be very attractive to things like the dollar menu at McDonald's, and least likely to be found at places like Vast. So selecting target markets, we have to determine how many segments we want to appeal to. And that depends on whether or not you have an undifferentiated market, which is sort of ignoring segment differences and offering just one product or service to the entire market. In a highly differentiated world, we find very few of these, but there are still some businesses that have a single product offering and they offer just one of something. And so if you think about things like wire clothes hangers that are staples of dry cleaning, that's, ignoring all different segments, just selling to every dry cleaner out there who then uses the hangers for their customers. Differentiated markets, marketing in a number of segments and developing separate marketing strategies for each. And the example that your text gives is Marriott, and I think that's a good example. And there's a video that you can look at on Bill Marriott's life in hotels and how they started out with a single motor hotel and then built a chain of large, big box, full service hotels where you had dining services and meeting and convention services and things like that. And now how they've gone into various segments. The first one that they developed after the big Marriott was a courtyard in the outskirts in the suburbs of Atlanta. They were trying to target businessmen who were traveling who wanted a nice room at a cheaper price and didn't need all of the amenities. And from that have become a number of other brands that have become very popular with various segments. They have segments for business travelers who are staying long periods of time in an area where they have kitchenettes and a larger suite kind of hotel. And then concentrated markets, selecting one segment and trying to capture a large share of that. And the example that comes to mind here is Rolex. Rolex wants to basically capture high-income producers, and so they select one segment, which is people with a lot of money, and they try to capture the largest share. And it's not that Rolex is the most expensive watch brand, but they are certainly the biggest market share of the luxury watch market. So positioning is creating an impression in the mind of the consumer, and there are two approaches. You can either focus on the consumer or focus on the competition. By focusing on the consumer, you try to position it by offering the benefits and features that the consumer wants. If you focus on the competition, you compare yourself to other products in the market. And your positioning strategy is going to depend on the product attributes and benefits, your product price, so how many attributes and benefits do you have, the product's price, the product's application, its class, your users, your competitor, and things like cultural symbols and repositioning. So with regard to product attributes and benefits, if you think about products that you use every day, and of course we talk about these positioning strategies as though each of these is a silo, but they are all obviously interrelated. So if you think about products that you use again every day, like razors, what are the various features that you can have on a razor? Are there 1, 2, or 3 blades? Does it have the sort of lubricating strip on it? Is it designed primarily for your face or for legs, that kind of thing? Where's the product price? Obviously, razors have a wide variety of prices in the market. There's the cheap disposable that doesn't move, doesn't have the pivoting head, that hotels oftentimes buy to give away to guests if they forget them. The product's application, obviously razors are used to cut hair, but what types of hair? The hair on a man's face is different often than hair on legs. The way the product is used, the product users, the competitors in the razor market, there are not a whole lot, although there are emerging more and more companies like Harry's is a new razor company that's entering the market, marketing largely through online and skipping traditional channels of distribution. Cultural symbols become enormously important in positioning. MGM, the one that I always use here is MGM had to redo the opening of their hotel and casino in Las Vegas because it was the head of a tiger, or the head of a lion, and that was considered unlucky in certain cultures. And so certain people wouldn't enter their casino as a result of the lack of luck that was perceived on the part of the consumer. And then repositioning. Once you have your position in the market, do you need to reposition it? This can be incredibly difficult, and the biggest example I can think of here is McDonald's. One of McDonald's most profitable market segments is the breakfast market. They've been losing market share to Starbucks, and if you look at the new McDonald's restaurants, they have sort of moved away from the feel of a kid, multiple child family experience to being much more like a Starbucks. They're sort of sleek and attractive. They've done away with the playgrounds. The problem with repositioning is that McDonald's, in my opinion, their strength is that they are cheap, fast, and consistent, and people don't generally think of them as being sort of high-end. So they've introduced the McCafe and a higher-end coffee product for the breakfast market to try and compete in that segment, and I'm not sure that it's going to be overwhelmingly successful. And your text talks about a number of cases where they've tried to reposition. JCPenney is one. Historically, JCPenney relied on sales and coupons, and they had basically trained their customer to that. They got a new CEO who decided that he was going to use the marketing strategy of Walmart and reposition JCPenney as sort of the everyday low provider in the mind of the consumer, and it just didn't work very well. So again, this has been very brief. I just wanted to make sure that I got all of the content covered from the class. Obviously, the class discussion adds a lot of richness to it. So I apologize for not having the video, but it was unavoidable, and I hope that this is helpful.